11:23 a.m. The Sea of Japan. Clear skies. Visibility unlimited. Wind calm at 4 knots from the west. The kind of morning where you can see forever and nothing moves without being seen, except something had already moved 11 minutes ago. 63 miles northwest of the North Korean coastal city of Hwasong, deep inside a pine forest that had been photographed by American satellites 16 times in the past year without yielding a single abnormal signature, because the signature had been engineered to look exactly like the trees around it. A transporter erector launcher had hydraulically raised its arm to vertical, locked its gyroscopic platform, completed its pre-launch checklist in 4 minutes and 52 seconds, and at 11:12 a.m. local time, ignited the first stage of a Hwasong-17 intercontinental ballistic missile. The missile carried a single re-entry vehicle. The warhead inside that re-entry vehicle had been assessed by the Defense Intelligence Agency at a yield of between 200 and 280 kilotons. Its program target was the city of Tokyo. Population, 13.9 million people. The launch plume was detected by the Space-Based Infrared System Satellite Constellation, SBIRS, in the first 3 seconds of flight. By second 7, the infrared signature had been classified as a ballistic missile launch with greater than 99% confidence. By second 11, the alert was transmitted simultaneously to USFK at Camp Humphreys in South Korea, USPACOM at Camp Smith in Hawaii, Strategic Command at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon, and the White House Situation Room. At second 19, the first call went to the crew of the USS Lake Erie, CG-70, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser operating in the Sea of Japan, 109 nautical miles southeast of the launch point. She had been on modified alert posture, Ballistic Missile Defense Readiness Condition 2, for 17 consecutive days, ever since signals intelligence from the Korean Peninsula had detected abnormal encrypted traffic between Pyongyang and mobile launcher units in the Hwasong mountain region. Her commanding officer had taken that intelligence seriously. Her crew had drilled BMD intercept procedures until the sequence was reflexive. Her AN/SPY-1B radar was already in full rotation. Her Aegis BMD software was current to the latest patch. She was, in the language of naval warfare, ready. What happened in the next 38 minutes would be studied in military academies for decades. But first, the mistake that made it possible. Because Pyongyang had made 4 catastrophic mistakes. Mistakes that were not born from incompetence, but from arrogance. The particular arrogance of a regime that had spent 30 years telling itself that its nuclear capability placed it beyond consequence, that the missile was the shield, that the shield made it untouchable. They were wrong. The first mistake, they chose 11:12 a.m. local time because their launch doctrine dictated daytime launches in clear weather for optical confirmation of the ignition sequence by their own observers. What that doctrine also guaranteed was that the SBIRS satellites had maximum infrared contrast against the cold ground background, making the detection window shorter and the classification confidence higher than any night launch would have produced. They had optimized their launch conditions for their own visibility and simultaneously optimized it for American detection. The second mistake, they had moved the launcher into position 71 hours before launch. They believed the tree canopy provided concealment from optical satellites. It provided concealment from optical satellites. It did not provide concealment from the L-band synthetic aperture radar aboard the NRO's Topaz constellation, which had imaged that grid square 4 times in the previous 71 hours and flagged a subsurface density anomaly consistent with a vehicle of between 40 and 60 metric tons resting on the forest floor beneath the canopy. The anomaly had been in the targeting database for 68 hours. 60 strike coordinates had been preloaded into the mission computer of a B-2 Spirit that had departed Whiteman Air Force Base 31 hours ago. The third mistake, they had not accounted for what the USS Lake Erie actually was. Their strategic assessment brief to senior leadership in Pyongyang, had characterized U.S. Navy BMD capability as capable of intercepting a maximum of 2 simultaneous incoming re-entry vehicles with a combined probability of kill not exceeding 60%. That assessment was based on publicly available test data from SM-3 Block IIA intercept trials conducted between 2006 and 2012. It did not account for the SM-3 Block IIA, a jointly developed U.S.-Japanese interceptor with a 21-inch second stage, an enhanced kill vehicle, and a probability of kill that the Navy had assessed in classified testing at 94% against a Hwasong-class threat trajectory. That assessment had never been published. Pyongyang did not know about it. The fourth mistake, and this was the one that sealed everything that followed, was the assumption that the United States would spend the first 20 minutes after a launch on the phone, arguing about whether to respond, trying to confirm intent, seeking diplomatic channels, hesitating. That assumption was built on a fundamental misreading of what 17 days of Readiness Condition 2 had actually accomplished. There was no hesitation. There was no argument. There was a crew that had been waiting for exactly this moment, a commanding officer who had pre-authorized weapons release under delegated authority consistent with the standing rules of engagement, and a fire control system that had already solved the intercept geometry before the missile had cleared the atmosphere. At 11:12 a.m. and 41 seconds, USS Lake Erie's fire control radar achieved track on the ascending Hwasong-17. At 11:13 a.m. and 8 seconds, 27 seconds after ignition, the Lake Erie's commanding officer authorized weapons release. At 11:13 a.m. and 22 seconds, the first SM-3 Block IIA missile left its vertical launch cell in a column of white exhaust, arced south to gain altitude, then turned north toward the projected intercept point calculated by the Aegis BMD engagement computer. The SM-3 Block IIA climbs at approximately Mach 15 in its boost phase. Its exo-atmospheric kill vehicle, a 40-kilogram kinetic interceptor that destroys its target through sheer impact energy rather than an explosive warhead, is guided in its terminal phase by a combination of onboard infrared seeker and mid-course uplink corrections from the Aegis radar. The physics of hitting a ballistic missile re-entry vehicle in space at a combined closing speed exceeding 20 kilometers per second were once considered practically impossible. The SM-3 Block IIA made them routine. The Hwasong-17 reached its apogee, approximately 1,100 kilometers above the Earth's surface, at 11:19 a.m. At that altitude on the edge of space, the re-entry vehicle separated from the final stage booster. It was now a ballistic object, following a Keplerian arc toward Tokyo, approximately 11 minutes from impact. The SM-3 Block IIA interceptor reached the intercept point at 11:21 a.m. and 33 seconds. The kill vehicle separated from the third stage. Its onboard seeker acquired the re-entry vehicle, a cone-shaped object approximately 1 meter in length, traveling at over 7 kilometers per second. The guidance system made 17 micro-corrections in the final 2 seconds of flight. At 11:21 a.m. and 36 seconds, the kill vehicle impacted the Hwasong-17's re-entry vehicle at a combined closing velocity of approximately 8 kilometers per second. The kinetic energy of the impact, equivalent to roughly 20 tons of TNT, destroyed the re-entry vehicle completely. No nuclear detonation occurred. The warhead's high explosive lenses, which must be precisely triggered to initiate a nuclear chain reaction, were shattered by the impact. The nuclear material itself, a subcritical mass of highly enriched uranium, was dispersed in fragments across a debris field that fell into the Sea of Japan, 312 kilometers north-northeast of the Japanese coast. Tokyo never knew it was coming. In the air defense operations centers across Japan, the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force had been tracking the intercept attempt in real time on their own Aegis-equipped destroyers JS Kongo and JS Chokai, both of which had been in launch posture as backup interceptors. The alert status dropped from emergency to secure at 11:22 a.m. The Hwasong-17 was gone, but the decision to stop there had never been on the table, because the National Command Authority had pre-authorized a full counterforce strike package under the existing nuclear employment policy and its conventional corollary. The conventional prompt global strike options that had been updated and preloaded into Pacific Command's targeting system 36 hours earlier, when the Topaz satellite flagged the launcher position. The pre-authorization had one condition: a confirmed launch against an allied nation. The condition had been met at 11:12 a.m. The strike package had been executing since 11:14 a.m., 2 minutes after the Hwasong-17's ignition, before its re-entry vehicle had even separated from the booster. The first assets were already in motion. From Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers that had been holding in an orbit pattern at 40,000 feet over the Philippine Sea turned northwest and pushed their throttles to maximum continuous thrust. Each carried 16 2,000-pound JDAM precision-guided bombs, 4 GBU-57A/B massive ordnance penetrators, the 30,000-pound bunker busters capable of penetrating 60 meters of reinforced concrete, and 8 AGM-158B JASSM-ER cruise missiles with a range exceeding 925 kilometers. Their target list was 41 coordinates, covering every known nuclear storage facility, ballistic missile assembly building, and command bunker associated with the strategic rocket forces of the Korean People's Army. From the submarine USS North Carolina, a Virginia-class fast attack submarine operating at depth in the Yellow Sea, 30 Tomahawk Block II cruise missiles were already in flight at 11:16 a.m. They had been launched in a compressed salvo over 9 minutes. Their guidance systems pre-programmed with target coordinates drawn from the same targeting database that had been constructed over 30 years of overhead surveillance, signals intelligence, and defector debriefs. Their targets: 11 mobile launcher support facilities, 4 missile fuel production plants, 3 re-entry vehicle assembly complexes, and 12 hardened artillery positions along the DMZ that had been assessed as capable of placing chemical munitions on Seoul. Those positions died first. The chemical artillery threat to Seoul was the highest urgency target in the entire package. Not the launch site, not the command bunkers, but the weapons that could kill hundreds of thousands of civilians in the first hours of any retaliation. The first Tomahawks hit their DMZ targets at 11:31 a.m. 12 hardened artillery emplacements were struck simultaneously. 12 structures that had been built into the granite of the Korean mountains over 4 decades were penetrated by earth-penetrating Tomahawk warheads and destroyed from the inside out. The threat to Seoul was neutralized before any North Korean commander on the ground had processed the fact that the intercept had happened. At 11:34 a.m., F-35A Lightning IIs from the 35th Fighter Wing at Misawa Air Base in Japan and F-35Bs from Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 121 at Iwakuni crossed into North Korean airspace at high altitude, completely invisible to the ground-based radar network below them. Their mission was suppression of enemy air defenses, not the traditional SAD mission of using HARM missiles to kill radar systems, but the stealthier version that the F-35 made possible. Simply flying through the air defense network undetected and destroying the radar sites with precision-guided bombs before the operators even knew they were under attack. 22 SA-5 and KN-06 surface-to-air missile batteries across the western coastal approaches and the Pyongyang air defense zone were struck in a coordinated wave. The operators in those batteries were looking at clean radar scopes. No tracks, no contacts, no threat indicators. And then their equipment exploded around them. The strikes took 9 minutes. When they were complete, North Korea had no functional long-range SAM coverage over 60% of its western airspace. That was when the B-2s arrived. At 11:41 a.m., 29 minutes after the Hwasong-17 launch, the first B-2 Spirit crossed the North Korean coastline at 42,000 feet. At this altitude, in this aircraft, with its radar cross-section measured in fractions of a square meter, it was simply not present to any radar that was still operational. It flew directly over the Pyongyang air defense zone without a single missile tracking it. It proceeded northeast, following a planned route toward the Hwasong Mobile Launcher Storage and Maintenance Complex in the mountains south of Hamhung. The GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator had been designed for exactly this target. Deeply buried, heavily reinforced underground facilities. The complex at Hamhung had been constructed beginning in the 1980s and expanded over 3 decades into a network of tunnels and hardened halls, drilled 60 to 80 meters into granite bedrock. Intelligence assessed it as containing storage for between 8 and 12 assembled Hwasong-17 and Hwasong-15 missiles, their associated re-entry vehicles, and significant stocks of liquid propellant. It was, in the words of the DIA assessment, the single most important fixed facility in the North Korean strategic rocket program. The B-2 released 4 GBU-57s in a sequenced drop pattern at 11:43 a.m. Each penetrator weighed 30,000 pounds. Each carried 6,000 pounds of PBXN-109 high explosive in its penetrating case. The sequence was staggered by 4 seconds to allow the first penetrator to open a channel through the rock before the second followed the same trajectory deeper, and the third followed the second, and the fourth detonated at the maximum depth reached by the third. The combined effect was a sequential implosion of the underground complex from entry point to deepest reachable chamber. The resulting underground detonation registered 3.1 on seismometers at monitoring stations in South Korea, Japan, and China. The Hamhung complex was assessed as completely destroyed. All contents obliterated. All tunnels collapsed, rendered permanently non-functional. The second B-2 struck the ballistic missile research and development facility at Sanam-dong on the northwestern outskirts of Pyongyang, the complex where the Hwasong program had been designed, tested, and refined for 2 decades. 16 JDAMs struck the facility's above-ground structures in a coordinated pattern that collapsed every major building on the 30-hectare compound. 2 GBU-57s struck the underground component. The JASSMERs from both B-2s, released earlier in the mission profile, had already struck the liquid propellant production facility at Sinpo and the re-entry vehicle manufacturing complex near Hwasong. Simultaneously, from the east, USS Lake Erie and the Aegis destroyer, USS Benfold, which had been operating 40 miles south of Lake Erie and had participated in the tracking solution during the intercept, fired a combined 16 Tomahawk cruise missiles at the mobile launcher unit that had fired the Hwasong-17. The launcher's position had been fixed by Spear's launch point triangulation to within 400 meters, and the Tomahawks used terrain contour matching navigation to refine their approach. The forest grid square that had hidden the launcher for 71 hours was struck by 8 simultaneous warheads. The launcher, its support vehicles, its fuel trucks, its crew of 31 technicians and soldiers, all of it ceased to exist at 11:38 a.m. By noon, 48 minutes after the Hwasong-17's ignition, the counterforce strike was complete. The final assessment, compiled over the following 72 hours from combination of NRO imagery, signals intelligence, and acoustic monitoring, documented the results with clinical precision. All 41 pre-assigned targets struck. 37 assessed as destroyed or non-functional. 4 assessed as severely damaged with residual functionality reduced by greater than 80%. The Hamhung underground missile complex, destroyed. The Sanam-dong R and D facility, destroyed. The Sinpo propellant plant, destroyed. The Hwasong re-entry vehicle complex, destroyed. 4 additional mobile launcher support bases, destroyed. 11 fuel storage facilities, destroyed. 3 missile assembly halls, destroyed. 12 DMZ chemical artillery positions, destroyed. 22 air defense batteries, destroyed. The original launch site, obliterated. The strategic rocket forces of the Korean People's Army, the organization that had spent 30 years building a nuclear arsenal and the doctrine around its use, had lost in 48 minutes the majority of its fixed infrastructure, its most capable production and storage facilities. and every asset that intelligence could locate and strike with conventional weapons. 0 nuclear weapons were used by the United States. 0. Every weapon in the counterforce package was conventional. The GBU-57s were conventional. The Tomahawks were conventional. The JDAMs were conventional. The message that sent that the United States could systematically destroy a nuclear program using only conventional precision weapons without escalating to nuclear exchange was itself a strategic statement of devastating clarity. North Korean casualties in the counterforce strike were assessed at between 600 and 900 military personnel killed at targeted facilities, with an additional 200 to 300 assessed probable. No civilian areas were targeted. No population centers were struck. The strikes were confined entirely to military facilities. American casualties, 0. Not one aircraft lost. Not one ship damaged. Not one sailor or airman killed or wounded. The B-2s landed at Anderson at 3:17 p.m. local time, mission complete. The crews ate lunch. The USS Lake Erie remained on station in the Sea of Japan through the following week. Her Aegis radar still rotating. Her SM-3 Block IIAs still loaded. Because the watch does not end, because you had a good morning. In Tokyo, 13 million people went about their Tuesday, without knowing that at 11:21 a.m. and 36 seconds, 40 kilograms of American engineering had met a North Korean warhead in the dark above the atmosphere and ended what would have been the worst day in human history since 1945. The Japanese government was informed at 11:24 a.m. The public was informed at 12:15 p.m. after the counterforce strikes were complete and the situation was assessed as stable. The statement from the Prime Minister's office was brief. It thanked the United States. It noted the effectiveness of the alliance. It did not need to say anything else. In Pyongyang, there was silence on state media for 4 hours. Then a broadcast of a military march played on a loop for 90 minutes. Then silence again. Whatever was happening inside the command structure of the regime in those hours, the recriminations, the fear, the dawning comprehension of what had just been destroyed, it did not reach the outside world. What reached the outside world was the imagery. The satellite photographs released by Pacific Command at 4 p.m. local time, showing the Hamhung complex as a series of collapsed depressions in a mountain hillside, the Sanam-dong facility as a field of rubble, the launch site as a scorched clearing in a forest that no longer had trees, and the clean, unbroken sky over Tokyo. This is what happens when a regime mistakes the patience of its adversary for an absence of capability. This is what happens when decades of provocations, tests, threats, and ultimatums are followed, finally, by the one action that removes all ambiguity and requires no further interpretation. The missile was fired. The missile was stopped. The sites that built it were destroyed. In the Sea of Japan, USS Lake Erie is still there. Her crew is still at readiness condition 2. Her radar is still turning. Her interceptors are still loaded and ready. Because the mission of the ship, every aircraft, every submarine, every satellite in the constellation that watches the sky, is not to win the battle after it starts. It is to be so present, so capable, so absolutely prepared, that the battle that starts is the last one the enemy ever tries to begin. That mission was accomplished on a clear Tuesday morning at 11:21 a.m. over the Sea of Japan. 40 kilograms of American engineering, traveling at 8 kilometers per second, in the dark above the world, and Tokyo never felt a thing.